Hey guys, JV here, and instead of uploading a guide today, I wanted to share some thoughts on the launch of Andromeda. What went wrong, why it happened, and how the game gets much better. If you're watching my stream playthrough, you know I'm well over 30 hours into the game by this point, and there's some very clear differences between the first 10 hours, the next 10, and even the 10 hours after that. So let's talk about it. Before we jump in, there are no spoilers in this video. The background footage you're seeing is from my stream, so I'm not there in the corner talking to you on the screen right now, so don't expect the lips to match up. Also, quick reminder that I upload Andromeda tips and tricks guides, multiplayer, and my streamed playthrough. So if any of that content interests you, make sure and subscribe. Let me start out by clarifying what this video is not. This is not an excuse for EA and BioWare, because there are very clear issues with the game that I could see preventing people from buying it. They fall under the polishing and technical department, also the front part of the game being weak compared to the rest. I've already made a video commenting on those issues, and so this video is not made in defense of those issues. This video is also not a review or a comment on reviews, because critics are entitled to their own opinions and have probably played more of the game than I have at this point. Instead, this video is about the perception of the game around launch, starting from the time that EA Access went up and through, I guess you could say, today, and what led to some of the particularly negative and volatile reactions. As you may or may not know, EA Access allowed players to play a 10-hour trial of the game, but there was a story cutoff point where you couldn't progress further, and that was the vault on EOS, a mysterious vault that you couldn't actually go into. Once you reached that point, the game said, no, you can't go further in the story, you need to wait until launch. Overall, I think the EA Access cutoff point was a very poor decision by EA and BioWare, and it led to a lot of the perception issues about the game, and those were compounded even further by social media and the lack of nuance that actually comes with those platforms. It's very clear after playing further into the game that the first 7 to 8 hours that you could play of the story in EA Access were pure exposition, and this happens in RPGs, by the way. It just does. Again, it's no excuse for the first part of the game being weaker than the rest, but modern open world RPGs tend to have slow starts. This game is no different. So nothing revolutionary in that respect. Of course, I would have liked to have seen BioWare put an emphasis on making the first part of the game not weaker than the rest, but this is just what we got. That's what we're dealing with right now. And the majority of these hours are spent talking to people, talking to them, seeing what they're about. And the fact that we had that cutoff point made people explore talking to people even further than they would have otherwise. People squeezed as much as they could out of that first 10 hours trial because there was a bit of exclusivity feeling to it. It's like, I can play this before the general public since I got EA Access, so I'm going to talk to everyone, do everything that I possibly can, so I'm ready to move on when the actual game unlocks. Within the first 7 to 8 hours that were exposition, there was maybe 2 hours of gameplay, untethered combat, running around a planet to experience outside of cutscenes and dialogue. Within those 2 hours, you had very limited exploration because of the radiation hazard on EOS, which, by the way, is not something you deal with on the other exploration planets, at least as I've played through the game 30 plus hours. I really do believe that pre-Vault EOS, the EA Access portion, is the worst part of the game in terms of exploration so far. It's like BioWare gave us a set of training wheels and said, hey, go out and explore, but you have some limitations on this. And that's just not how the rest of the game is. It wasn't representative of the full exploration experience that you have after the stopping point. And once again, the other 5 to 6 hours of that first story portion was extended exposure to dialogue, which usually isn't a bad thing, but the problem was that it was with humans. And as we know, humans don't have the best facial animations in this game. I don't think they're on par for 2017. In fact, I've said this and I still believe it, that Dragon Age Inquisition had better facial animations. That game came out almost 3 years ago, or 2.5, something like that. Bottom line is that this piecemeal portion of the game, the front part, created a perception that most of the game would be spent talking to humans and seeing these poor facial animations that would bring you out of the experience and just make you think, okay, that's not right. You know, the lip syncs off, the eyebrows aren't moving at all, there's some dead spots in the spaces, and on and on. And again, I do believe this is exclusive to humans because most of the aliens look just fine. Now, obviously, 30 hours in, it's definitely not true that most of the game is spent talking to humans and seeing the poor facial animations. In fact, in the past 10 to 15 hours, I think I've talked to a handful of humans. That's just how the game has gone. And so jumping to that conclusion, I think, is a bit ridiculous, but you can't control that idea, especially since we live in a day and age where it is so very cool and popular to hate on something, even more so if you have no intention of critically assessing it. Maybe it's just human nature, but it is far easier to pass judgment on something that you have no idea what you're talking about because you have limited exposure. You don't have a moral dilemma in your head like, okay, should I lie or should I not include these specific details in order to further my point? The problem is people become authorities, pseudo-authorities on things they have no experience with. A common response, though, is, I've watched the game, so I know. I don't have to play it. I've watched a lot of the game. The issue with that is that a clear majority of those people saying that have only watched the first 8 hours because that's all that could be shown up until a certain point. Yes, I do think it's possible to become an authority on a game if you've watched it, but not the first 8 hours. You're an authority on the first 8 hours, not the entire experience. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that you can't watch or play the first 8 hours and decide that the game is not for you. You're entitled to that. I think 8 hours is enough time to put into a game to make that decision. If the first 8 hours of the game did not convince you, then that is EA and BioWare's fault. Plain and simple. So to recap, these are the two main issues I think led to this terrible launch of Andromeda from a perception standpoint. Number one was the extended exposition dominated by poor human facial animations that led people to believe this is what you're going to see for the rest of the game. The second thing is the limited exploration of EOS that really is not representative of the full exploration experience. If EA and BioWare had a do-over in hindsight, I think they would have extended the cutoff point beyond that vault on EOS for 2 or 3 hours, something like that, just to show that the game actually does open up beyond that point, or also allowed streamers and YouTubers to go beyond that point just to show people, just to let people watch and see that yes, the game does open up. Now let's shift gears and talk about, from my perspective, in my opinion, from what I've played 30 plus hours, how the game does get better beyond that vault on EOS. Once again, I'm speaking in generalities here, so there should be no spoilers. The first thing is obviously plot development. As you move forward, the plot develops, obviously, but the point I'm making here is that the exposition is over after that first vault. Really, things expand from that point. You get a lot more plot development, you understand what's going on, the mystery that's been established in the first 7, 8 to 8 hours of the game, more stuff is uncovered, and so you get some actual plot and story development there. You also get open and free exploration. Like I said, it's like training wheels on EOS before that vault. Seriously, the actual explorable area doubles, maybe even more than that on EOS. You get to meet with and interact with the new races of the game, which is something you have limited exposure to in the first portion of the game. It really does remind me of the first Mass Effect and coming across the Asari, the Krogan, the Solarians for the first time. You get that experience and feeling with these new races. I mentioned this briefly already, but I've seen only a handful of human faces in the last 10 to 15 hours of me playing. Doesn't mean they're not there and I couldn't seek them out on the Nexus and be like, look, there's a distracting poor facial animation face, but it's less distracting because I'm talking to a lot of aliens. I'm not interacting with humans as much, and so it's certainly less of a distraction. Shortly after the vault in the main storyline, you're introduced to diverse, large, and very interesting new planets and environments to explore. Again, very big, lots to do. You have some environmental storytelling, some character development that's involved in these new places. It really does make EOS look inferior compared to the rest of it, and I do think that is a problem. I do wish that EOS was a little bit better. It kind of feels like a miserable Mars kind of planet. After the vault, you also unlock more squad mates. I think that's fairly obvious, but the more squad mates you have, the more you can bring them around, listen to their ambient dialogue, to their banter out in the world. You get a lot of character development in that. There's more I could say, and it's probably pretty obvious as you play through a game, you're going to get this, this, and this. But I feel like that point does get lost in the conversation because people are like, the first 8 hours were this, and so the rest 8 hours are going to be this. That's usually not how any game works. You're going to get development in a lot of different areas, and there's much more to see here. And I believe the general reaction across the board is that it gets better. That's a common idea for people who are actually playing the game instead of talking about it on the internet. There must be some truth to it because I do see a lot of those points. And so, is it fair to have to wait 10 hours to get to this point in the game and actually have it open up? For me, it depends on the length of the experience, how much is offered, and how much time I want to invest into it. But for a lot of people, it's not. You need to be gripped and hooked, and the game needs to be good in the first 8 hours. I get that. That is a decision you are perfectly entitled to make. Personally, I didn't feel that the first 8 hours the EA Access experience wasn't that horrible. After playing further past that in my stream playthrough, I think it's a weak point, but people are exposed to a weak point right at the beginning of the game. I do feel that the first 8 to 10 hours should be representative of the entire experience, and it's just not with Andromeda. I'd love to share this conversation with you guys and see what you think. Are you willing to spend 10 hours to get into a game before it opens up and becomes, really enjoyable like I feel it has? This is something that these huge open world RPGs do require of us sometimes, and Andromeda is no different. It's not at the cutting edge, it's not revolutionary in that way. So let me know in the comment section below, are you willing to spend 10 hours to get into a game? If you learned something new or just enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe for tips and tricks guides, multiplayer, and my stream playthrough of Andromeda. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.